In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good evening. It's such a privilege to be doing Bible class, and I'm grateful to God for it. As usual, it's Wednesday, 7 p.m. So welcome aboard this wondrous journey as we head into Matthew's Gospel, chapter 8. Well, in chapter 8, Matthew writes about miracles. See, we saw the Sermon on the Mount in chapters 5, 6 and 7. Yeah? Now in chapter 8, Matthew has organized chapter 8 to be full of astounding miracles. There are 7 major miracle events that he describes. First is how Jesus healed the leper. The second is when he heals the centurion's servant. Third is when he heals Peter's mother-in-law. The fourth, he heals all those who are brought to him. The fifth is truly a miracle because the reaction of the scribe is a miracle itself, because scribes would never have believed in what Jesus says, because Jesus was denouncing whatever the scribes had written. The sixth miracle is Jesus calmed the storms. The winds and the waves obeyed him. And the seventh is how he heals 2 demon-possessed men in the region of Decapolis, which is Gentile territory. Before we read, I want to tell you something about how leprosy is viewed today and how it was viewed 2000 years ago. You know, today leprosy is completely curable. They have something called multiple drug therapy, which puts a quick end to the leprosy. And many people who have it also, before there is physical manifestation of wasting of the body, if somebody takes his medicines, he'll be cured completely. And because of that, there is much lesser social stigma to leprosy today. Yeah, it is curable. But 2000 years ago, it was a dreaded and incurable disease. Bit by bit over the years, over about 9 years, 10 years, it would waste the human being's body and make him absolutely despicable. It was believed to be highly contagious also. Yeah. And people who had leprosy were barred from coming into town because they thought it was contagious. So they had to stay in camps, in leprosy camps, outside the village or the town. You must have seen it in the movie Ben-Hur. A leper was never allowed to wear good clothes or to comb his hair. He had to always wear torn clothes as a physical sign that he was a leper. He could not even comb his hair. So imagine his plight. And he knew he was wasting away to death. Yeah, it was terrible. If a leper came to any place, that entire place would become unclean. For example, if a leper stood outside a house and peered inside the window, the whole house would have to be cleaned. That's how terrible the laws were. The leper had to maintain at least 4 cubits distance, that is 6 feet distance, from another person. He couldn't come nearer than 6 feet, like today how we have for the pandemic. Yeah, he had to keep that distance. And if a man was downwind to the leper, if the wind is coming from there and the leper was standing over there, this man would have to keep a distance of 150 feet away from the leper, because they believed it was so contagious. And the leper had to do one more thing. He had to shout, "Unclean, unclean." This is Jewish custom. You have to know this. Yeah? So then he can understand the gravity of the situation for lepers. The leper, as far as human society was concerned, was considered dead. His family would give him up. They would drive him away from the house. The people in the village or the town would drive him away. The poor fellow was lost. How am I telling you all this? How do I know? These laws were given in the Torah, in the book of Leviticus, and chapter 13 contains these rules. Yeah. And to make sure that the lepers kept their distance, rabbis and people, the Jews, would throw stones at the leper if they ever saw him, so that he would keep his distance. That's how sad was their plight. This was during the time of Jesus. And in such a scene, Jesus comes and a leper comes to him, asks to be healed. Let's read it. Jesus healed a man with leprosy. When Jesus came down from the mountainside, remember he was at the Sermon on the Mount here. When Jesus came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him. Knelt. Yeah, that's worship. And said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. I am willing, he said, be clean. Immediately he was cleaned of his leprosy. Then Jesus said to him, see that you don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them. You see what's happening here? The man, for a Jew, if he ever touched a leper, he would become unclean. Ever. But see how the leper has confidence. He comes and kneels before Jesus. Of course, 6 feet away. Yeah? And said, Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean. But what does Jesus do? Before he even speaks a word, Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. Action before words. He just touched him. For a contagious disease, he was taking a great social risk and a pathological risk. And he said to him, I'm willing. He said, be clean. Immediately he was cleaned of his leprosy. And then Jesus said to him, see that you don't tell anyone. This don't tell anyone has befuddled a lot of people. Jesus has just started his ministry. And remember, during that time, the Jews were under the Romans and they had been under so many foreign rulers. And Isaiah and the others had predicted that the Jews would get a Messiah. They were waiting earnestly for the Messiah. And even a slight inkling of the Messiah, and these people would rise into revolt with that person who was supposed to be their leader or the Messiah. And many of them had been killed. Now Jesus' ministry had to be spread all over Palestine. Not only in Galilee, but also in Samaria and Judea. And all over the place. So Jesus had just started his ministry. Yeah. So he tells him not to tell anyone. But of course he tells him, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them. Because he had been ostracized and thrown out of the village or out of the town. So he would have to go to the temple and show himself to a priest. There were no doctors then. We don't have MBBS or whatever. So they had to go and show themselves to the priest. The priest doubled up as a physician or whatever and checked the man. The procedure was like this. When the man would go to the priest would examine him head to toe. And he would tell him, okay, you get 2 doves, and some other things, minor things. And he would, over running water, he would kill one of the doves. And the blood would flow over the other turtle who was below. Okay? And then he would set the second turtle free. Then he would ask the man to shave himself and report back to him in 7 days. Now these turtles were expensive. These turtle doves were expensive. When he came back the 7th day, he would have to come back with 2 bulls, and a heifer or something like that. I've just forgotten exactly. I don't remember today. And they would sacrifice those animals. Yeah, it was a pretty expensive affair to come back into society. But that was the law as laid down. Yeah, in Leviticus chapter 13, the law of Moses. So what Jesus says, And after this thing was done, the man was asked to bathe, and he had to shave off his head, even his eyebrows and everything. He had to shave off. Yeah. Then he was pronounced clean, and a certificate was given to him that he was free of any leprosy. Then he could be taken back into society. This was very rare, There was no cure for leprosy then. It was only possibly those people who had been negatively diagnosed with leprosy, possibly who had to go back to the temple to get, reinducted into society. But that's how it was. But Jesus is asking him to follow the law, you see. Now, before we read the next part, I'll have to tell you some things, because if I tell you that, then when we read the passage, when we read the verses, you'll be able to understand better what they mean. Now let me tell you, the Jews were under the Romans. The Romans were a very powerful empire. They had a very potent military force, and also they were very good administrators. Their main thing was to collect taxes and fill up the treasuries in Rome. Of course, for the Jews, the Romans were Gentiles, and they were considered unclean. Why? Because they used to eat pork, and they used to follow their own customs. Didn't have those ablutions and all, So they were considered unclean. All Gentiles, all foreigners are called Gentiles. They were all considered unclean. If you don't know, you'll have to go back to Bible study 1 and 2. Yeah. Now, but look at the Jew and the Roman paradox. Who was ruling over whom? The Romans were ruling over the Jews. But the Jews were a proud race. They thought they were the chosen race of God. They were the chosen children of God. So they thought themselves to be superior to the Romans, who are much powerful, much richer, they were more empowered. But the Jew believed that he was better off than the Roman, and used to believe that the Roman is unclean. Yeah, the Jews had their noses on top. That was a paradox. And a Roman could not enter a Jew's house. If he did, the Jew would have to, after the Roman left, he would have to clean up his own house, because his house had become unclean, and he would have to have a bath himself. And no Jew would visit a Roman's house. You remember when they went to Pilate to get Jesus condemned? They stayed outside. Yeah, and Pilate had to come out early in the morning at 6. Yeah, because the Jews wouldn't go in, because they would have to have a bath, because it was the Passover. Imagine what the Romans must be thinking about the Jews. I've told you about the Roman Empire. Now let me tell you where the Roman Empire got its potent force from. Their army. It was such a potent force, and it was because they were divided the army into legions. Legions is a collection of 6,000 soldiers, and each legion was divided into 60 centuries. That each century had 100 soldiers, and each century was headed by a centurion. Okay? So 60 centurions managed 100 men each. The centurions were the finest battle-hardened men you would ever find in the world. They were the backbone of the Roman army. There are about 6 instances of centurions in the New Testament. All of them have been honored in the writings of the New Testament. First, the centurion near the cross. When he saw Jesus die, he said, truly, he was the Son of God. Then you remember Cornelius, when Peter converted Cornelius. Cornelius was a centurion, the first convert, Gentile convert. Then there were 4 centurions. In Paul's life. First, when the Jews were plotting to kill him, they cornered him in the temple premises, and they wanted to kill him, and they were taking him out. They shut the door and they wanted to kill him in the book of Acts. And then this Roman centurion rushed down from the barracks with his soldiers and rescued Paul. The second one was when the Jews wanted, Paul they wanted to murder Paul. When they said, when we have a trial, you just call for a trial and we'll murder him there. But so Paul's nephew heard this, and he told the centurion, and the centurion told the governor, and they escorted Paul to Caesarea. In Caesarea, then again another centurion, Felix, the governor, ordered one of the centurions to take care of Paul. And finally, when Paul appealed to Caesar in his case, and he was then told that he will have to go to Rome, a centurion was assigned to accompany Paul to Rome, and that centurion treated Paul pretty well. But the centurion that we are going to read about today, the 7th instance, is a centurion who is very special. You know why? Because he was humble. He was powerful, but he was humble. He had faith, tremendous faith possibly that no Jew could match. And most incredible of all, he loved his slave. What was so incredible about loving his slave? I'll tell you. The next thing I'd like to tell you is about what were slaves in the Roman Empire. A slave under the Roman Empire slaves were not considered human at all. They were considered as things, animate things, not human beings. It wasn't a crime if a master got enraged and killed his slave. No court case or anything against him. He was justified because he owned the slave. And he was owned 24/7. He was owned all day long. Any time of the day or night he could be woken up and made to work. So the slave didn't have a life of his own. He was totally bound to the master. Yeah. So having told you all these things about the Roman Empire, about the centurion, about how the slaves were treated, we shall read this wonderful passage. The faith of the centurion. When Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him asking for help. Lord, he said, my servant lies at home, paralyzed, suffering terribly. Jesus said to him, shall I come and heal him? The centurion replied, Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. But just say the word and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes. And that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. What is amazing here is he's come to intercede not for himself, he's come to intercede for his slave, for his servant. And he has taken a lot of trouble because he's come from afar. He's come to see Jesus. He must have been searching for Jesus and he found him. Must have come on his horse and with his entourage. Yeah, he's come from afar. So tremendous. This is tremendous. And he's interceding for his slave. For his slave is taking so much trouble. Yeah, what a wonderful man. But see what Jesus asked him. Shall I come and heal him? You want me to come to your house to heal him? Now Jesus was a Jew and the centurion was a Roman. How could a Jew go to a Roman's house? But still Jesus is asking, shall I come and heal him? Open. No risk, just like he didn't have any risk against the leper who was an outcast to Jewish society. Jesus has no reservations of going to the centurion's house, who is the centurion also is a Gentile, to cure the slave who is also a Gentile. He is not a Jew. Jesus is willing to become unclean and take the risk. So he asks, shall I come and heal him? The centurion replies no, and his reply has been echoing around the world billions of times every day. He says, Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, my servant will be healed. And then he says something very dramatic. By his saying so, he is acknowledging that Jesus is God and he is truly the Son of God. See what he says. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes. And that one, come, and he comes. Soldiers. They listen to him. His command is absolute. They will listen to him. And his servant, when he tells, do this, he does it. So he's telling Jesus that you too can command nature. You can command anything, because he believes that Jesus can do anything. It is the ultimate worship ultimate compliment to Jesus. So I'll read from verse 10 onwards. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed and said to those following him, "Truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Joseph in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom, which is the Jews themselves, will be thrown outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Then Jesus said to the centurion, "Go, let it be done just as you believed it would." And his servant was healed at that very moment. Now the Jews believed, that when the time came, there would be a great banquet with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, and they would be present. But what Jesus is saying, he's telling them, no, they will be thrown out because they don't have that faith, the quality of the faith that a Gentile has, that this Gentile had. So we cannot never put our noses on top and say that we are Christians or we are like that. You never know about faith. Yeah. Now there's something interesting that came to my mind when I was reading this. The centurion was interceding for a slave. I've always wondered, when somebody asked me to pray for them, I used to wonder, is the intercessory prayers, are they of any use? When that person who's asking you to pray, he can pray, no? And anyway, God knows everything. So why intercede? These thoughts would come to my mind. But praise God, when you seek answers, He gives them to you. There are so many wonderful reasons why we should intercede. First of all, it pleases God when we intercede for others. I'll tell you how. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 59, verse 16, actually it pleases God when we intercede. So what does Isaiah write? He saw that there was no one. He was appalled that there was no one to intervene. So his own arm achieved salvation for him, and his own righteousness sustained him. So God is happy when He finds that we care for others and are willing to pray for them. The second reason is, even Jesus prayed for intercession. He said, especially when He was troubled, He said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what to do. He was interceding for those people who had committed the transgression. And again, Jesus says in Matthew, He said it in Matthew chapter 5, verse 44 in the Sermon on the Mount, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. That too is an intercession for your enemies and for those who persecute you. If Jesus could say intercessory prayer, what about us? Then what will intercessory prayers do? It will bring us closer to God. How? Remember when God came to Abraham under the giant trees of Mamre. The three men came, and one of them was God. After telling Sarah that she would bear a child, Abraham, and as he was leaving, Abraham followed God and he started pleading for Sodom, and God said, I'm going to destroy it. When Abraham pleaded for Sodom, and he bargained for Sodom, he was interceding for Sodom. He was interceding for Lot. And God must have been internally very happy that he got the chance to spare innocent lives because of this intercession. God just waits to forgive us. The fourth is, when we intercede, it increases our empathy for the people we pray for. For example, we learn to put ourselves in their shoes and empathize with them. That bhaichara or that feeling of oneness improves when you pray for intercession, when a person is suffering. There's also another thing, many times a person who is very, very sick or in a coma cannot pray for himself. So we ask for intercessions, don't we? And lastly, when we intercede, it will help us to share each other's burdens. It will help us to know that we are not alone. So intercession is a great thing. But many a times, I am also guilty of it. When I say, I will pray for you, is it just a habit? Or do we really pray? Now, what I think we should do is, instead, let us say, let me pray for you right now. And then immediately pray together with them, even if they are on the phone or wherever. Just pray for them at that very moment so you can realize your promise to them. Yeah? That's how it can be. Shall we go to the next? Verse 14 onwards, 14 to 17. Jesus healed many. When Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. See, he has been working all day long. And it is a Sabbath. I'll tell you how I know it is a Sabbath, how we come to know this day is a Sabbath. He touched her hand and the fever left her. And she got up and began to wait on him. Jesus must have been very tired, and he goes to Peter's place in Capernaum. He doesn't have a home there. So the moment he sees Peter's mother-in-law sick, Jesus goes and touches her hand, that's all. And her fever disappears and she gets up, and what does she do? She doesn't say, okay, I'm feeling weak or whatever. No, she gets up and starts waiting on them, serves them food or whatever. She starts doing it immediately. That's the magic. That's what we are supposed to do. Many a times we go to Jesus, we pray to him. Yeah, we pray to him, and after we feel, blessed, after some time we go back to our same old sins. We go back to those same old situations. Yeah, Peter's mother was not like that. The moment she was healed, she got up and she started doing her work. Okay, let's read further. When evening came, many who were demon possessed were brought to him. What is this when evening came? What is the meaning of this when evening came? And why did all these people come to him when evening came? I'll tell you why. You remember I told you that the Jewish day started at sunset. Is when you could see at least 2 stars in the sky. That was considered the new day. So that day when Jesus had healed the leper and healed the centurion's slave, and he had healed Peter's mother, that day must have surely been a Sabbath, and he was very busy. But the people who wanted to get healed did not dare come to him because they were following the Sabbath. But the moment evening came, they were raring to come to Jesus. The moment they must have seen those 2 stars or whatever, the night or the moon or whatever, they came charging towards Jesus, to Peter's house. Many who were demon possessed were brought to him. And he drove out the spirits with the word and healed all the sick. So much of power goes out, when Jesus must have healed people, so much of power must have been going out from him. He must have been very tired that day. This is verse 17. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took up our infirmities and bore our diseases. This is taken from Isaiah chapter 53 verse 4. Matthew is saying this because he must have sensed Jesus was very tired that day. So he's quoting Isaiah, that Isaiah prophesied. So, I want to tell you about this Peter's mother's getting up and working. There's a lesson for us. I'll read a short story by Oscar Wilde. Christ came from a white plain to a purple city, and as he passed through the first street, he heard voices overhead and saw a young man lying drunk upon a windowsill. Why do you waste your soul in drunkenness? Jesus asked. The man said, Lord, I was a leper and you healed me. What else can I do? A little farther, through the town, he saw a young man following a harlot, that is a prostitute, and said, why do you dissolve your soul in debauchery, in all these sexual sins? And the young man answered, Lord, I was blind and you healed me. What else can I do? At last, in the middle of the city, he saw an old man crouching, weeping on the ground. And when he asked why he wept, the old man answered, Lord, I was dead, and now I am alive. What else can I do? Is this what is happening to us? You know the story of when you clean a room, when you drive out the demon, and your heart is like a clean room which has been swept clean. And if that room is left empty, that one demon will go and get 7 more demons. and this time your fate will be worse than before. The trick is when Jesus cleans your heart, sweeps it clean, let Jesus stay in it. Let Jesus stay in it. Else, this is what will happen to you. What else can I do? I'm human. I will sin. What else can I do? Yeah. So, many a times, we have to remember this. We go for a retreat, we feel as if we are in heaven. But 10 days later, we are back in the same old rut. Okay, we come to the next. Verses 18 to 22. The cost of following Jesus. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." Another disciple said to him, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead." Let's look at this passage. First, when Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake in the boat. He must have been preaching from the boat, or healing them, So what he does, he tells his disciples, let's cross to the other side of the lake. What is on the other side of the lake? The Gentiles, Decapolis. And if he goes there, maybe the Gentiles won't know him much, and he will not be, he'll be able to take a breather. That's why he's telling them, take me to the other side. But before he can get out, a teacher of the law comes to him and asks him, I'll follow you wherever you go. This teacher of the law is a scribe. And you know what Jesus has been against? All that the scribes have written. But yet the scribe wants to follow him. It's a miracle. But Jesus is so wise. He says he tells him the cost of following him. He says you might become very, impulsive and say that you want to follow me now because, you've got your emotions all worked up like a soda water, bottle. When you open a soda water bottle, it's full of fizz, But after a minute or two, what happens? The fizz dies down and the bottle is useless. So what Jesus tells him is, foxes have dens, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. You're coming with me, but I have got nowhere to go. There's a great cost if you come and follow me. And Jesus knows that he might not be able to sustain himself. Let's go to the next one. Lord, first let me go and bury my father. But Jesus told him, follow me and let the dead bury the dead. Now many people have been, have so misunderstood this passage that it's pitiable. See, let me tell you something. The burial customs during the time of Jesus among the Jews was that the day any of your mother, father, anybody dies, you cannot leave your home and do some other work or go somewhere else. The only place you can go away from home is the tomb. You can't go anywhere. So obviously this man who has come to Jesus has not left his dead father at home and come to Jesus. No, it's not that. It was the duty of every son to make sure that when his father died, he would bury him. Let me tell you a story that a Syrian missionary has told. He was very friendly with a young Turk. The Turk was an intelligent man, a Turkish fellow, and he was, of course, young, and he was studying. And he was very clever. So this missionary told him that once you finish your education, why don't you take a tour to Europe? What will happen? It'll round up your education and make you more mature because you'll see the ways of the world. The man said, No, I can't do that. I must first of all bury my father. So this missionary thought, oh, your father died today. He says, no, he didn't die. I will have to make sure that I am around when he dies, that I will have to bury him. That's exactly the meaning of this. I hope this settles the problem. Now, the next thing is Jesus calms the storm. Then he got into a boat and his disciples followed him. Yeah. Suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping and the disciples went and woke him, saying, Lord, save us. We are going to drown. He replied, You of little faith, why are you so afraid? Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves. and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, "What kind of a man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." First of all, I want to tell you, the Sea of Galilee is about 20 kilometers long and 13 kilometers wide. That's a lake, but they used to call it the sea. So I, being a sailor when I was younger, I used to think, what type of storm can come in a small lake like that? So I was a little incredulous about it. Till I went to the Persian Gulf, on a ship. I used to go regularly. And there they got a wind called the Shamal, that's called the Shamal winds. And two men in fishing boat, small fishing boat. The fishing boat capsized and we saw it. And we were at anchor. And the wind was terrible, I'll tell you. And we saved their lives, of course, by letting out a rope, which fortunately went towards them, with the currents. And they held on to it and we pulled them up. I realized that it's not only in the high seas that you have these type of storms. But I'll tell you about the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee, including the valley of the River Jordan, is below sea level. And around the Sea of Galilee are these hills and gorges, from where the wind will tunnel into the Sea of Galilee. And it will come from all sides. And it will be sudden. Many people have reported it. I've read many historians talk about how raging the Sea of Galilee can become. Yeah? So there is no doubt that in one of these cases, it comes suddenly, even on a bright day, bright sunny day, this type of storm, furious storm, can be worked up on the lake. Yeah? And why was Jesus sleeping? He was tired, as I told you. He must have been very tired. One after the other, people were coming to him. Yeah? The whole of the Sabbath he had spent, and he must have been very tired, and he wanted to sleep. But amazingly, the disciples had seen Jesus performing so many miracles throughout that day. And what do they say? "Lord, save us, we are going to drown." If Jesus is in that boat, do they need to fear? They didn't need to fear. If Jesus is in your heart, do you need to fear? No. So what does Jesus say? He gets up and he says, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the sea calmed down. This is super power. Yeah? Amazing. Before we go to the next, it's about the healing of the two demon-possessed men. I want to tell you something important. I want to tell you the customs of the Jews. Even today. Jews will not eat anything that is not kosher or halal. They call it halal, no? They say every kosher food is clean. So they had to classify what is clean food and forbidden food. Forbidden, we call it haram, no? So, what is kosher and what is non-kosher, or what is forbidden? It is all spelled out in Leviticus again, the same book, Leviticus chapter 11. You'll read all about it. Go there and you'll see. You'll find it very interesting. But I'll explain some things to you. So that you know what Jewish customs are. What was forbidden food? See, all land-dwelling animals that chew the cud, that is ruminate. You know what is chew the cud? Some animals, have two stomachs. First, when they eat, the grass and everything goes down into the first stomach. Okay, I'll call it first stomach, where all the water and everything is drained out, and sort of some bacteria treated. Then what the animal does? It regurgitates. It brings it back into its mouth, and with its saliva will start chewing it again. That's called chewing the cud. That thing is called cud. They chew it again and ruminate, like we chew gum, and we ruminate, we think, that is called ruminating. So they chew the cud, and then it's easy for them to digest, and since their intestines, can take it easy. Yeah. So there were two conditions for an animal to be considered as kosher meat. First, they had to chew the cud. In other words, they had to have two stomachs, and they should have had cloven hooves, cleft, cleft, no? Which is cut in between. So they had to have hooves. I'm showing it to you here. Yeah. So animals that are ruminating or chewing the cud and having cloven hooves are clean foods. But they must be mammals. They must be herbivores. They must be not eating other animals. They should be herbivores. And all animals must go through kosher slaughter. The way they slaughtered the animal was very important. It's called shechita. Yeah. The knife had to be so sharp, it had to have no nick. You could check it on a nail or something, how sharp it was. And the esophagus, and the trachea, all these windpipe, food pipe, jugular veins, where the thing goes to our brain, and carotid arteries should be cut without damaging the spinal marrow, which is at the back. One cut, and that was it. And the blood should be totally drained. What used to happen is the heart would keep on pumping, so all this blood would drain out very fast. And they say that once you cut all these things, the animal would be dazed and you would not feel anything. That way of slaughter is called shechita. That's called kosher slaughter. Crawling creatures like snakes, mice, and flying mammals like bats are banned, not kosher. And regarding fish, anything that comes from the water that has both fins, that fin, and scales may be eaten. But if it doesn't have scales, you cannot eat. If it doesn't have one of these, you cannot eat that. Yeah, like eel and the other things, water snakes and all. Also, all birds are good to eat, are kosher, except birds of prey that hunt other birds and kill them and eat their flesh, like eagle, hawk, vulture, all these birds. And all insects are banned except the locust. You must have seen in videos, in WhatsApp, a lot of people eating locust. It possibly tastes good, and it has a high content of protein. Yeah. So in the desert and all, they eat locusts. They are allowed. But pigs definitely were unclean. Not only were they not kosher, why they were not kosher? Because they do not ruminate. They don't have a second stomach, stomach in front. And they do not chew the cud. You won't find a single pig in any Jewish town. You would never find one. They've driven them all away, possibly. Eating pigs in those days was a definite health hazard. I'll tell you why. Pigs have a lot of trichina worm. The trichina worm from pork can drill itself into the brain. It goes through the bloodstream. And it's long. It rolls it up into a ball. And then it unleashes its power. So let us read this passage, since I've told you about kosher food and non-kosher food. Jesus restores 2 demon-possessed men. When he arrived at the other side in the region of Gadarenes, which is in Decapolis, the land of the Gentiles, 2 demon-possessed men coming from the tombs met him. They were so violent that no one could pass that way. "What do you want with us, Son of God?" they shouted. "Have you come here to torture us before the appointed time?" Some distance from them was a large herd of pigs feeding. The demons begged Jesus, "If you drive us out, send us into the herd of pigs." And he said to them, "Go." So they came out and went into the pigs, and the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and died in the water. Those tending to the pigs ran off, went into the town and reported all this, including what had happened to the demon-possessed man. Then the whole town went out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they pleaded with him to leave their region and go away. So let's look at it. Let's look at it in detail. It's also in the book of Mark, this incident. So Jesus allowed legion, they call themselves legion, to possess the nearby herd of swine and send the pigs into the sea. The evil spirits wanted to bring death and destruction, and they finally got their chance. When they asked Jesus, Jesus allowed them. He said, "Go." Now, what is the problem? Why did Jesus allow them to go into the pigs? The pigs died. See, Jesus' compassion drove him to destroy the pigs for the sake of 2 human lives, and that's how valuable human life is. Jesus did not hate pigs. He loved humans, but some animal activists are offended. But don't they take vaccines and medicines where mice, rhesus monkeys and other creatures have been sacrificed during clinical trials? See, Jesus was born a Jew. Naturally, he would follow Jewish customs. He had to be born somewhere on this planet. God had to send him somewhere. Yeah. If Jesus had been born in India, he would have followed our customs. But he was born in Palestine, where pigs were banned. That's why he let the demons go into the pigs. Yeah. So let's summarize what all we've done today. First, as I said, he healed the leper, which was a great risk, social risk as well as a physiological risk. Then he healed the centurion's servant, both of them being Gentiles. The risk of being unclean. Then he healed Peter's mother-in-law and how she got back to work. He healed all those who were brought to him. The reaction of the scribe, was a miracle in itself, but Jesus tells him the cost of following. Then the sixth thing that we learned is how he calmed the sea and the lack of faith in his disciples. And the last one, the healing of the 2 demon-possessed men in Gergesenes. That is the exact place when you go. It's not Gadarenes, but Gergesenes. I'll tell you this when we come to the book of Mark. Yeah, there's a long explanation for that. Okay, so that's all, folks. That ends Matthew chapter 8. God bless and praise God.